Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us as we kick off our four-part audit preparation webinar series with the first installment entitled How to Prepare for an SAP Audit, presented by Jeremy Tarwater and Ben Wilcox. Before we get started, we want to inform you that this presentation is being recorded and will be distributed at the conclusion of the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. If we don't get to your question immediately, we will address it at the end during the question and answer portion of the presentation. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Jeremy and Ben.
I'm Ben Wilcox, and with me is Jeremy Tarwater. Jeremy, why don't you step to the next slide? So I've been with AnglePoint since earlier this year. Prior to that, I was with PwC. And I've had a SAM focus for the last 10 years, and led the SAM practice, SAP practice at PwC. I work with organizations on various aspects of software asset management, software licensing, and specifically supporting Jeremy and our other practice leaders in working with our clients and partners. Jeremy's a director leading our SAP practice. Prior to joining AnglePoint, he held positions at SAP and KPMG. At SAP, he was part of the global audit license service team, conducting customer audits. Today, he leads our SAP team and working with organizations to better manage their SAP estate. So you see a little polling question here, asking what your job role is. So this will allow us to get a better insight to the attendees here today and to hopefully align our discussion a little bit. Why don't we go to the next slide, Jeremy? We'll have a couple other polling questions throughout the webinar, and the input would be great. Hopefully we can use the output of that in the content today. So what we thought we'd do is step back just a little bit before we get started on who is AnglePoint, who we are as an organization. At the heart of our business, we are professionals delivering services to major organizations, really focused on software licensing, software asset management, and security. AnglePoint is based on individuals with deep subject matter knowledge and expertise, many of whom came from major publishers, Oracle, SAP, and others, as well as major consulting organizations. Let's go ahead and let's flip to the next slide, Jeremy. We do work on behalf of the many several major publishers, and really this gives us access to continue to build our knowledge and expertise around changes in rules and approach to measurement of various different software applications. And we continue to place a high emphasis on continual expansion of our knowledge base, whether it be through that channel or internal training or through acquisition of talent to better serve our clients and our partners. You will also see us out in the community in terms of ITAM and SAM, and this includes such things as the ISO board. Ron Brill, our CEO, is a member of that board. We also participate in IBSMA and ITAM events through training and certification classes and speaking. The Gartner event that was recently held in Orlando, we were a sponsor of that event, and we occasionally participate in events with our partners. So you can see us out in the marketplace. So that's a little bit about AnglePoint as a whole. What we want to do is get into the agenda for today. And really this is a fairly straightforward agenda aimed at sharing our thoughts on how best to prepare for an audit and manage the audit with SAP. From a high level standpoint, why does SAP do audits? Or how did I get selected? To how does the audit process work? Giving you some insight to how the audit evolves from one level to the next. And really the meat of it, how to prepare and close an SAP audit. This is where we'll spend a fair bit of time today. and then then we'll get into some common pitfalls. And really this nets back to either lack of preparation or overall governance around managing the license estate. We want to leave enough time at the end for some Q&A. So hopefully there'll be some really good questions raised for some discussion towards the end of this session. So really from the start, why does SAP do audits? Oh, we got another polling question. These are out of my control, so they'll pop up now and then. Have you ever been through an SAP audit? Just let us know, yes or no, and we should be able to see some results. So why does SAP do audits? Really, this is because they can. They have an audit clause, and they have the right to periodically request measurement of the usage of their SAP license, the applications that you use. You have an obligation to comply to the request. It's really up to the terms of that audit clause. You could look at it and say, well, SAP is protecting their IP, or they're generating incremental revenue. At the end of the day, they have a right to do an audit. What tends to happen next is the question everybody raises, well, how did I get selected? Did I do something? I'm going to transition to Jeremy to give some of his insights in terms of how SAP goes about selecting audits.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Ben. And just to reiterate some of what Ben was mentioning at the beginning, we're excited to share some of this information with you. Hopefully it's informational for you. We would love time at the end for any questions. So as we go, either type it into the chat or at the end we'll leave some time. But yeah, Ben mentioned something that most of our clients deal with around SAP audits. Why me? Why am I being audited? Essentially, SAP has recently published a document that states 4 different reasons, 4 general reasons of why clients will be, or licensees will be selected for audits. The first one that they mention is analytics criteria. And essentially what that means is they'll collect data over time, whether that's from audits or internal purchasing habits or anything like that, or any sort of public information that they find. They will use that information. So for example, if there's an acquisition or a merger or something like that of a major organization, then they'll use that information to select their candidates for audits. As I mentioned, or as Ben mentioned, they do have the right to audit customers annually. So sometimes it's just on an annual basis, right? Every year the client is scheduled, this is your audit date. Outside of that, you know, they do have different reasons for auditing customers. So the next option would be proactive initiation. So again, SAP, they don't go into grave detail on what that means, but again, it's going to be some sort of information that they've collected and determined that this is going to be an excellent candidate for an audit, either to, again, protect their IP or create incremental revenue there. The next 2 are reactive initiation and random spot check. So reactive initiation might very well be some sort of public information that they've collected. So the famous, not famous, but the recent lawsuit with Diageo and SAP, SAP found the information about Diageo using Salesforce.com in place of a call center from a online post from Diageo themselves, right? Bragging about how, or not bragging, but boasting about how awesome their new Salesforce.com solution is. So those sort of items that are put publicly need to be reviewed and make sure that from a licensing perspective, customers are being protected. And then random spot checks. They'll go through and they'll decide, okay, these licensees are good, let's go forward with them. So just to reiterate, summarize, SAP audits clients because they can. Why does SAP choose which licensee? Really, it's based on these criteria that they provided in the published information. So now that you are being audited, or you have been audited, it's important to understand, how does the audit work? Well, what is the process behind it? It's a good idea to know what the process is before you're audited. It's always uncomfortable to go through an audit kind of bouncing off the walls, not knowing what's next. So generally speaking, this would be considered a basic audit, right? Looking at the very first step here, the GLAS will send an audit notice, right? So they're going to say, hey, Mr. Licensee, here is your audit notice, and these are the systems we want to collect. The licensee would then go and collect all of the data that they are being requested to collect. They consolidate all that data, and then they send that data back to SAP. That would be considered a really high-level basic audit for SAP. Once that is complete, once that data is sent to SAP, either the audit is closed, SAP receives it, and that's it, or it moves on to what SAP calls enhanced audits. Now, enhanced audits can be very dynamic, and they are, is various in approach as we can count, right? So it's rare to see the same enhanced audit over and over. A lot of times SAP will go for indirect access in these enhanced audits. They want to know about products that were not measured by the basic audit, so using the USMM. And so really after that basic audit is complete, that's when you start to move into enhanced audits. Let's see, do we have another polling question? That we do. Are you going through an SAP audit currently? So if you have been through an SAP audit, are you going through an SAP audit now? We'll give everybody a second to answer. Okay. All right, moving on. So now that we've kind of established why SAP audits, what the process is, from our experience and from helping multiple clients through audits, we've come up with several steps to help customers and licensees plan for success, right? The audit is going to come, it's on an annual basis usually, and so these are the steps that we have derived from all of our experience. We'll walk through each step, but generally it's audit prep work, right? There's certain things that we need to do before an audit ever comes. We want to control the audit, validate the data, drive to closure, understand what possible findings there might be, and then OMP. OMP stands for optimize, mitigate, and purchase. So with the first one here, I'm going to pass it back to Ben to go through some of the audit prep work that we recommend to our clients.
Yeah, I think if you're, a major organization, any organization, the software vendors have been out there auditing for some time, and it's not a matter of if you get audited, it's a matter of when. And SAP's audit program is robust enough. It's a matter of having the proper governance in place, the proper program in place, so that when you do get notified of an audit, that you're prepared for it. So it really is about putting together a plan for preparing to submit your measurement results in line with the request from SAP, whether it be from a basic standpoint or an enhanced standpoint. And a foundation, it is about knowing what do you own and what are you using. And really these two items can largely be covered under a governance program over your SAP license estate. So what do you own? Really, it's about knowing your contracts in detail, your main agreement, all the amendments, unique use rights, any impact of global terms and conditions that might be connected to your agreement. There is certain products like business objects, commonly called Bob J, and unique measurements that you need to consider as well. So knowing all your entitlements, summarizing that at an application level, your unique terms, your quantities per product, your engine metrics, etc., and knowing what you own. The next step is understanding what you're using. And once again, reiterating from a governance standpoint, this is something you can do on an ongoing basis. As Jeremy mentioned, using USMM or using the law reporting process, you can actively and on an ongoing basis run reports using those tools to do measurement of your name user licenses and engine metrics. None of this will get reported to SAP unless you actually submit it to them. And so you can use it as part of your ongoing governance program. And you can identify where there's opportunities to clean up on a name user basis, whether it's incorrect license types or duplicate users, etc., and do, let's call it housekeeping to clean that up and get your measurement accurate based on your actual business requirements for SAP. So this is really just laying the foundation of preparing for an audit, but we want to position it as an ongoing governance aspect that you would be doing on a periodic basis, whether it be monthly or quarterly, so that when you do get notified, it's not a fire drill.
Hey, just if you don't mind, Ben, I'll just interject real quick on the product use rights here for business objects. So a quick example, we had a client that they were counting the CPUs for their business objects deployment, and there was a discrepancy versus what SAP had counted. And knowing what their contracts were, understanding what the terms and conditions were around that counting was huge for the client. Ultimately, they were able to reduce their exposure by several $1 million based on understanding of the contract. So I can't reiterate enough to that first point. What do you own? Do you really know what you own? Do you understand how SAP is going to look at your contracts? The next one that I just real quick I wanted to mention was the USMM. A lot of our clients, they think that the USMM and the LAW are only to be run during an annual audit. That is not true. SAP gives you those tools so that you can run it every week if you want to. If you want to run it every week, every month, every quarter, do so. Run it often, get used to it, make it turnkey, make it so that it's easy. You can push a button and it collects all the USMM reports for you. And it spits out the reports so that you can understand them. So just wanted to point those 2 points out. Thanks, Ben.
Absolutely. Great input, Jeremy. There's also the element of when SAP notifies you and you have a strong knowledge of your estate, you have a strong knowledge of your entitlement, you are not asking SAP a lot of questions around your entitlement or how to run reports. If you can demonstrate a strong knowledge, strong understanding of, hey, we ran a report recently, here's our recent measurement, can you just use this? It may change the tone of how SAP approaches the audit. I can't guarantee it, but it's one of these points of, if you can demonstrate you have a governance program as part of your broader SAM program, it can go a long ways in terms of how the audit's managed and further put you in control, which is really one of our messages here. We do believe that you, as the customer, should be in control of the audit. And there's steps, there's ways that you can do that to you really control the data requested, the scope, the overall timeline to really get closure to it. We've seen some of these audits go on for months, over a year, and it's really about pushing SAP to get closure to it. So it starts at the beginning in terms of getting clarity around the scope. Have an understanding of what the audit clause says, what SAP has a right to do, what you're obligated to do. And if it transitions to an enhanced audit, have clarity with respect to the details that SAP's requesting. Have them request it in writing, the anticipated timelines, and closure to the steps to get to closure. Communications is really critical. You need to establish internally primary points of contact within the organization to support responding to SAP. but you should also have primary points of contact with SAP so that you can have a regular cadence to keep things on track. with regard to your internal team, ensure there's protocols set up for communication with SAP. Don't allow data to be sent over to SAP without going through a single funnel point. Don't allow interaction with SAP with your admin team, your SAP admin team, without going through a funnel point. Know who's contacting who and what data flow is going in what direction. I would structure a regular cadence schedule with SAP so that you can stick to a timeline. You can hold SAP accountable. If you turn over data, expect a certain point where they are able to say that's what we need and we're ready to move to the next step. And so you're working towards that final closure date. And really, that's what it's about, is managing the timeline and making sure that SAP is doing what they're expected to do to progress this in a timely way. If you act it, they should act it as well. And ultimately, at the end, you should be aligned to get SAP to sign off that the audit is completed and closed. So it is about taking control through communications, through expectations, clarity of data requests, and ensuring that the scope is within the parameters of your agreement with SAP. Okay, let's, at this point, I'm going to transition it back to Jeremy to dig into some of the details. Do we have another polling question at this point? Or are we going to
No,
move
not
in?
yet. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do it in the next couple. So just one more point on this, just to reiterate some of the points that Ben made. Sometimes we run into clients that they make the audit the priority, right? Business requirements always take priority of audit task. So if there is an audit task and it's affecting your business requirements, by all means push back on the audit and say, Mr. Auditor, Mrs. Auditor, I need 3 more weeks to accomplish my business requirements. If that's cleanup, or if that's making sure that whatever you're going to provide to SAP is accurate, then you do that, right? All of us have day jobs. Our audits aren't your number one task throughout the year. So I just want to make that clear that those business requirements, your day-to-day job is more important than an audit task. With that, we're going to move on to validate all data. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've been working with the licensee and they say, I don't know why SAP is asking this. They requested this table. So for example, they wanted the USR02 table. Why? What are they looking for in that table? It's too bad, but too many times the licensee will say, I don't know why they want it, but we already sent it. We've already sent them the data. We don't even know what they're looking for, but we sent it to them. Our recommendation is never send data to SAP without understanding what SAP is looking for and understanding what you're sending. Know what's in the data before you send it. That goes for both the USMM, the LMBI tool, non-ABAP systems. So if they're asking for third-party products like Sybase, or not third-party, but acquired products, Hybris, any Java-based products that they're requesting usage from, make sure that you're reviewing that and understanding those reports before you send them to SAP. Now, a big one is indirect access. SAP always starts with a very benign data request when it comes to indirect access. A lot of times it's send us your architecture diagram. Most clients, they don't really understand why, how does that relate to indirect access? Why are they requesting an architecture diagram? They may even feel like, well, SAP already has this information. Maybe they just want to update their records or something like that. But 9.9 times out of 10, if SAP auditors ask for an architecture diagram, they're looking for indirect access. They're trying to find third-party applications connected to SAP. So again, don't send data to SAP unless you understand what they're looking for. And it's pretty simple. If they give you a data request that you don't understand, go back to them. SAP, please explain, what are you looking for? Why is this required by the audit? What data are you going to use from this report to support your audit right? If they can't, if they can't articulate what that is, don't provide the data. And then confirm overall usage for named users and engines before they're shared to SAP, right? You want to make sure that you understand what named users are being used, what engines are being used, and what that impact is before you share that data. The next step is drive to closure, and we have another poll that we want to ask. So those of you who did answer that you've experienced an audit in the past, how long did that audit last? And as you're responding, I'm going to keep talking. So the reason that we're asking this question is because the drive to closure hopefully supports you in making that number as small as possible, right? Or that time frame as low as possible. SAP sometimes can drag audits out for months on end. As Ben mentioned, they can go even longer than a year. We have one licensee that we've worked with in the past that they had an audit going for more than a year, and it's just, that's too long. The audit should be closed quicker than that. So how do we drive to closure? SAP notoriously can be slow to respond once data. Okay, so looking at the poll responses, not too many responses, but it looks like longer than a year wins. It's the most common from the 3 responses we got, and then 5 to 8. So, and that 5 to 8 range is pretty common. That's really where we see most audits, is they'll last in that range. So how do we drive that audit to closure? The first step is, as we've already mentioned several times, with each data request, ask for what the next steps are and what the due dates are. If SAP blows by due dates, which sometimes they can, hold them accountable. Use those escalation paths that you established at the beginning of the audit to escalate and say, hey, I have been, I don't want to do this audit for 5 to 8 months. I need SAP auditors to respond to us quickly and tell us what we need to do. If there's no next steps, we're done. We're going to move on to our day jobs. Use, as I mentioned, use escalation paths. Make sure that whoever's in charge, whoever's been put in that primary position of communicating with SAP is doing a good job of following up. If you provide data and you have due dates, make sure you're following up with SAP. It's kind of like running a project in and of itself, right? You want to make sure that you're pushing back, you're holding people accountable to those due dates. Follow up frequently. That is something that will help drive that audit to closure. Now I put here, follow up until the audit is closed officially. Now SAP doesn't always make it clear, okay, you're done with an audit, right? They won't send all the time, they won't send an audit closure document to say, thank you for providing all the data, we're done, we'll see you next year. A lot of times they just go dark. We'll talk about that in the next slide a bit, but we want to make sure that we're following up to make sure that the audit is actually closed. It's a good idea as well to establish the next audit start date, right? So if the audit is officially closed, what is our next start date? And that way you can start to plan. You can, get your resources in place and do all the tasks that you need to get done prior to an audit. And then again, hold SAP accountable. If they don't hit that start date for the audit, your resources were ready. They were, willing to do it. If they blow by their start date, then, maybe you need to look at a new start date months in the future. So hopefully those steps will help organizations, licensees drive the SAP audits to closure. The next is understand findings. So you want to make sure that once SAP has collected your data and they have created their findings report, you understand what what are the findings? Now, if you've done the previous steps, you should already know, right? You should already know, okay, this is what SAP is going to see in this report. This is where their potential findings are going to be. And so a lot of this should be repetitive, right? It's iterative. Once you've reviewed all the data and sent it to SAP, they're going to come back to you, and you want to make sure that you're matching what you saw with what they're seeing. So it's very common that SAP will provide an audit report or a finding that you can't easily find where we're licensed for that product in our contracts. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One might be just terminology, right? The product name that they're using in their finding might be different than the product name that you licensed in your contracts. Now, if that's the case, it's just simple, going through your contracts and maybe asking a couple questions back and forth to SAP to say, is this the product that you're referring to in your findings? But that step is very important to make sure that you're matching. This is what SAP finds. This is what's in our contracts. And the reason for that is because you'll use your contracts to either mitigate or dispute a finding. So if SAP says, for example, that you have to pay for sales and service order processing, and in your contract it says that it's included in the bundles that you purchased, then you simply need to dispute with SAP and say, look at contract XYZ and find where it says that sales and service order processing is included with our product set, and therefore we don't need to license it separately. And in those cases, SAP will drop it and move on. But again, if that step is not done where you're matching, this is what the finding is, this is what SAP is finding in our contracts or not finding in our contracts, a lot of times it just moves to purchasing. SAP salespeople will take it and say, hey, this is what the finding is, you guys need to buy it, and nobody did the legwork to figure out whether you actually needed it, so you buy it. The next step is review the financial impact of any findings, and then figure out, is there anything in your contracts that allows you to either exchange products that are not being used at the moment, or don't have any plans to be used. It's very common that we find lots of shelfware for SAP licensees. They'll purchase products with the idea that they're going to implement them within the next year or so. It never happens. Plans change. Those products are just sitting on the shelf waiting to be either used or turned back in. So find opportunities within your contract. Do you have exchange options? Do you have parking options? Can you terminate some products to make room for these new purchases? And then the last one, we'll talk about this in the next slide, reduction in use, right? So for example, if SAP has found that you have a certain number of named users that you need to purchase, perhaps there needs to be additional work through your named user licenses to see if there's users that are not even logging on, users that don't need access. Sometimes access is just a blanket statement for licensees' security departments, right? They say, well, everybody in our organization needs access to this, this system. And again, the legwork should be done already, but if it hasn't, do that work to figure out, is that true? Does everybody need access to that system? Hopefully, once these steps are done, licensees will understand better what are our findings and do we need to actually pay for something. Now moving on to the next slide, so OMP, optimize, mitigate, purchase. If there is room for optimization, now optimization might be, for example, if you have a set number of named user license types, professional, employee. If you do an optimization exercise in your named user space, you might discover that you can actually license ESS users, right? You have a certain subset of users that are very limited. All they're doing is time and expense reports or something like that. That would be an optimization criteria that you could use for your purchasing. So finding other named user types that you haven't purchased in the past, finding what those are, and then going to SAP Audit and saying, hey, I know that you want us to license 100 more named users. We think that we need to license 10 of these, 10 of these, and 80 of these. that optimization step should be done for every finding for SAP. The next step would be to mitigate. So this kind of goes back to what I was mentioning on the previous slide. If you have a finding and there's an opportunity for reduction in use, that would be one way to mitigate what you need to purchase going forward. So who doesn't need access? Do we have another product that can substitute SAP's solution that's much cheaper, right? Is there another BI solution that we could use in the interim? Is there some other solution that SAP sells that's less expensive than the one that we're using? So there are ways to mitigate what needs to be purchased. And then ultimately, if after the optimization mitigation steps are performed, there still needs to be a purchase, then we always recommend the following things be included with your purchase. List prices. Customers, licensees have a very difficult time understanding what their list prices are for their products and their discount prices, and that affects future purchases. That affects the ability to look back at your contracts and understand really what your financial impacts were, what your investments are, without that information. Per product quantities and discounts per products. So again, per product, listing out this product, the list price is X, the discount rate is this, and this is what the net price is, right? You want that sort of detail for every single product in your contract. You also want to make sure that if there are special terms like product use rights for certain products that govern the use of a specific product, you want that term not somewhere in the web sphere of terms and conditions on their website. You want to include it in your contract as a specific, this product is governed by this term. The reason for that is the terms that are out there on the web, SAP can change them and update them at their own will whenever they want. So you might purchase a product under a certain term, and then SAP goes out and unilaterally changes it. That could change very well how it's measured, how it's used, or how it should be used, and it could open you up to compliance risks. Details, details, details. We want as many details, as much detail as you can in every purchase from SAP. You want to make sure, again, it is perfectly clear in each contract exactly what was purchased, why it was purchased, how it was purchased, what your prices were, what your discounts were. That will open up so many more doors for future purchases, as well as understanding, what the licensing implications are of each additional purchase. So with that, I'm going to move to common pitfalls, and Ben, feel free to.
Hey, Jeremy. Yeah, I was just going to say on that, when you're focused on making that purchase to resolve any kind of audit findings, et cetera, we've talked a bit about controlling the audit. One step you can do is negotiate, let's call it an audit holiday. There are organizations that have been successful in negotiating a 2 or 3 year window of not having to submit a measurement. And so it's something that you can negotiate, bake into your audit clause. Recognize if you say no audit until December 31st, 2021, on January 1st, 2022, you will get notified. But it's something that you can negotiate, and I think at the end of the day, Jeremy hit on a couple of items around unique terms and so forth. There's a lot of different areas that you can negotiate with SAP.
Excellent, thanks, Ben. So with that kind of concludes our approach, right? What we recommend, right? You want to do that audit prep work. You want to control the audit. Make sure you're in the driver's seat. That should be an overarching theme for how to prepare for an SAP audit is control. You want to control. The licensee controls it, not the publisher. Validate the data, drive to closure, and understand those findings. Ultimately, if there are findings, optimize, mitigate, then purchase. So with that, hopefully that supports a very successful audit process in your organization. So we wanted to, excuse me, we wanted to move on to common pitfalls, right? And talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace where they're just easy wins that you can take back to your organization today and figure out, are we doing any of these things? And if so, how can we do them better? So the very first one here is blank user types. Blank user types we see all the time. And essentially what SAP will do with those is if you don't license or if you don't assign a license type to a user, SAP will assume it's the highest one, professional, right? They're just going to assume it. And then they'll count it and they'll say, well, granted, you may not own or need 12,000 professional users, but that's what the audit says. So that's our starting point. That's where we're going to start. That is a terrible place to be in from a compliance perspective, from an audit perspective. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're going through all of your users, right? Making sure that you are not leaving user types or license types blank. Go through, find dumming accounts, find unmanaged accounts, remove them. You want to also check the removal process itself. A lot of times SAP has a standard process. This user will be removed after X number of days of not logging in. I can't tell you how many times we have helped clients and looked at that process, and that process is either not working effectively or there are outliers, people that are slipping through that process. The next is contractors. We helped a licensee that had over 30,000 contractors that fell through that process that I just mentioned. They had a process in place that as soon as a person left the organization, they were removed from SAP, but over the past 20 years or so, contractors never were employees, so they never left. So they just had all of these contractor dummy accounts just sitting there. No data validation. Again, I mentioned that in the validate all data step. We see it all the time. Organizations send data without understanding why they're sending the data, who they're sending it to, what SAP is looking for. The next one is, why do you need the data? Again, that's part of that. Why does SAP need that data? What data are they looking for? Don't send the whole table. Figure out which columns they need from that table and only send those columns. Don't send them the entire organization's table structure. The next is a never-ending audit. We see it all the time. Licensees don't push SAP to close audits, so they just keep on going. They never stop. Hopefully, through this webinar, you have some idea of how you can drive your organization to close audits. Don't let it go 5 to 8 months or more than a year. 30 days is plenty of time for SAP to do their work and for you to do your work to close an audit. The last item I wanted to mention is SAP is reluctant to provide statements of compliance. A lot of times organizations say, okay, we're done with the audit. Can you give us a statement of compliance? SAP usually will not do that. They don't want to say, yes, you're compliant on this day. Instead, what you need to request is an audit closure, right? Really, that's what you're looking for. You want SAP to say, we're done, we'll see you next year. So make sure that that is adjusted within your organization. That should help alleviate any never-ending audits. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Ben, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can help you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Also cognizant of time and wanting to allow enough time for anyone to raise some questions. We've covered a lot of detail in terms of the audit process, which is really based on our experience working with clients over the years and our understanding of SAP license terms. At the end of the day, our position is every client's contract is unique. So you really need to understand your own contract, your own level of entitlement. Whether it's from establishing a current entitlement position based on that detailed review of contract documents, through a comprehensive license assessment, optimization, you can realize significant value through leveraging SAP license experience. And that's, really where Jeremy and his team can help out. And, we've indicated some duration of time here on this slide for each one of these exercises, basically indicating that some are more deeper dive than others. It is all dependent upon your organization, your SAP contract documents, and the complexity of scope. And we would work with you to define that, and define the appropriate approach to meet your needs. But I can't stress enough that there are times when it makes sense to bring in somebody with deep SAP license knowledge to help you out through the process. So let's move to the next slide. I just want to give enough time. As mentioned, you will see us out in the marketplace, and we are scheduled to be at the IBSMA SAM Summit in Chicago later this month, and we will be facilitating a certification class with regard to SAP license management, and we'll be participating in the SAM Summit itself. So that's a great event, happens on an annual basis. And then we will have a blog that's forthcoming and in line with this topic today, how to prepare for an SAP audit. And that should be published fairly soon, watch for that. And then moving forward in the webinar series that Alex announced at the beginning, the next one will be November 20th, and it will focus on Oracle. And then that will be followed with IBM and Microsoft, which I think based on the holiday schedule might happen in the early part of 2019, but just watch for those announcements forthcoming. Our view is SAP and these other publishers are major publishers, major spend within your organization. They represent complexity, challenges, changing license rules, and there's a need to stay current on those license rules and adjust approaches. And at the end of the day, it's about establishing a governance around managing your third-party software within your organization. And our aim is to help organizations do that, to mitigate risks, drive cost savings, and to avoid all the operational intrusion from these audits. So with that, I would like to open it up for any questions that the participants might have. Jeremy, here's one. How do I ensure I'm not double counting users who have multiple SAP IDs assigned to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first step is to make sure that you're using the LAW. The LAW, so essentially the way it works is the USMM, those are reports from disparate systems. So you might have 5 different systems. You're going to collect a USMM from each of those systems, and then you'll use the LAW tool to consolidate all of those reports into one succinct report. That consolidation step is necessary to make sure that users are not being counted multiple times. Now, there are outliers there, and basically what you want to do is you want to look within your organization and find what is the unique identifier we're going to use that covers the biggest patch of our user population. So for example, if user ID is the right consolidation method and it will cover 99% of your users, use that and then find that remaining 1%. What is the unique identifier that will help you to consolidate those users into the rest of the population? If it's email address, account number, first, last name, whatever it might be, do that consolidation manually after that first step of using the LAW. It is really important to make sure clients know that, licensees know that. SAP doesn't want to license multiple licenses for a single user. They just want one user to have one license. There are a few caveats to that, a few exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, that's the way SAP wants to do it.
I can take this next question. We have a large number of amendments to our contract. How do I determine what I have a license for? This is a pretty good question because it's fundamental to the slide that we talked about in terms of preparing for an audit, and really it's fundamental to the overall governance of managing your SAP license. we've often worked with clients that have a main agreement that dates back 10, 15 years and multiple amendments following that agreement. And, you know, if you're close to your SAP agreement, you'll know that for every incremental purchase, you'll have an additional amendment covering additional professional users or a specific application. And it's very important to basically work through each and every one of those documents to identify the applications that you have a license to use, the license metric, name user license or an engine metric, understand the quantities, understand the unique license terms, your costs, your renewals. Detailed summary will enable you from a governance standpoint to be able to use the reports from USMM that Jeremy just talked about to develop a license position, but it would also help you in terms of conversations with procurement team to be able to develop strategy for future purchases and possible renegotiation. There are times we've seen amendments that parked licenses for a period of time, or did trade-ins of licenses, or connected where you had original terms for your core agreement, but then language was inserted into amendment, particularly in the more recent years where it redirected terms to the global conditions. And as Jeremy pointed out, those conditions can change whenever SAP wants. So I've also seen amendments in multiple languages, split between languages. So I can't stress enough the importance of going through each of the amendments, identifying the applications, the entitlement detail, and, you know, in that summary, it should identify the amendment so that you can actually go back to that amendment if there's any kind of questions, basically creating a library. So those two questions came in. I just remind people that if you want to raise a question, you can put it in the chat, you can, Jeremy and I can address those questions if you put them in the chat box. So we've got 10 minutes left. Any other questions? Or Jeremy, any points you want to add on here?
Yeah, hey Ben. So one question that we get pretty often when it relates to audits is, will SAP sue us? And while we are not SAP, we have a lot of experience. We've reviewed dozens and dozens, hundreds of contracts really, and helped many licensees. And then me myself, I work for SAP as a licensed auditor. And generally speaking, SAP's position on lawsuits is pretty conservative, right? They don't just go out and threaten suit to everybody and anybody who doesn't want to comply with the audit, or those who dispute an audit finding. The cases that have been recently in the news, so the Diageo case and the Anheuser-Busch case, those in our view are exceptions to the rule. Those are, you know, very unique situations with SAP. Unfortunately, they did go to court. And I think the Anheuser-Busch went to arbitration, so they didn't actually make it to court. But you know, those sort of public trials, if you will, of the licenses is very rare. Most organizations can take care of the audit just using the normal methods, going through your sales executives, working with the auditors to establish, you know, a mutual agreement between the three parties. So I would say that risk, the lawsuit risk for SAP, is very low, and organizations really shouldn't be fearful that that's ever going to happen in the course of a normal audit, or even an audit that there is, you know, disputes.
Just remind everybody that if you want to submit a question to Jeremy or I, you can put it in the chat box and we can react to that. Jeremy's touched on indirect access, and we've certainly touched on it a couple times, but we could do a whole nother webinar on indirect access and some of the changes that have happened more recently, the approach to managing your data, the risk assessment, and so forth. That's a deep topic in itself, and perhaps, Jeremy, we do that on a future webinar. But that is certainly an area of consideration when you're preparing for audit and you're managing your IT infrastructure, and how do you develop a strategy for working with SAP around indirect access.
Yeah, absolutely. And other topics that, again, we could do whole webinars on include tooling. So SAP has the USMM and LAW tools to help you manage your SAP licenses, but it leaves a lot to be desired from a licensing perspective, from an optimization perspective, and there are tools out in the marketplace that can help in that space, right? We could talk about, you know, what those tools are good at, where their limitations are, what will still need to be done manually. What does it take to implement them? We are partners with many of the SAM vendors, or SAM tool vendors, and as partners, we do implementation, so we can implement Flexeras and Snows and Asperas and all the other you know, SAM tools that are out there. If they have a SAM offering, we can speak to it, or an SAP offering from those tool vendors, we can speak to it.
It's great. So I think we're close to the top of the hour. There doesn't seem to be any further questions at this point. Feel free to reach out to Jeremy or myself if you've got questions that pop up later. You want to have a more detailed conversation. And please pay attention to our communications with regard to future events. As I mentioned, we'll be doing the Oracle webinar in November, and then following that with Microsoft and IBM. And this is a great opportunity to get insights from our practice leaders. So with that, I say thank you to everybody who joined today. Alex, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the great presentation, and a big thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. If you have any further questions or would like to connect with one of our experts, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through email at info@anglepoint.com or on our website at anglepoint.com, or like Ben just graciously said, that you can reach out to Jeremy or Ben directly. If you're interested in the other 3 installments of our audit prep webinars, you can learn more on our website under the events section. Our next webinar is about how to prepare for an Oracle audit and will be held in November. More details about this will be released shortly. Thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.